for joining us this evening. July has been designated the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Awareness Month. Now you would have heard, reading in the press today, the latest discovery of another oil find. I don't know whether I should compliment the minister for that, or that is purely coincidental, sir.
Purely coincidental.
Now, EITI is something we've been hearing a lot of recently, and as I said, it means simply the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. As you recognize, we are extracting petroleum and oil and gas from below the sea. Now, this initiative is usually led at the national level by a multi-stakeholder group made up of the government, the private sector, and civil society. Tonight on Plain Talk, we have the co-chairs, Mr. Raphael Trotman, Mr. Hilbert Shields, Mr. Curtis Bernard. Mr. Raphael Trotman is, of course, the Minister of Natural Resources and the man in charge of all these issues surrounding the petroleum sector. Gentlemen, welcome to Plain Talk.
Thank you for having us.
Now, let's start by that first statement I made. This discovery, I think it was described as a massive find in one of the media. Why is there not a greater sense of euphoria? Or is there, and I'm not seeing it, about such news? Is it that we don't understand the implications, we don't accept our good fortune, or somehow we don't think it's going to make any big difference to us?
Well, maybe I can start to say.
Yes, by all means, Minister.
Thank you. That certain government's part, and others can speak for themselves, we've taken a decision some time ago not to be too euphoric about these discoveries, rather than to be a little more sober-minded. We are quite aware that not too far away are avaricious onlookers who have already declared their desire to get what we were after. So, in fact, when the Payara discovery was made, and there was another snook, even to a small extent, there was not much fanfare. Government did issue a statement. We have been working with the companies, Exxon and Hess and CNOC. So we were quite aware that this was going to be announced yesterday. In fact, they made the confirmation over the weekend. But we certainly are more, I think, taken up with the work that has to be done to put things in place rather than to be running around with jewels in hand saying, look at what we have. So that has been our posture. And I think that, if I may, the other factor has to be the fact that this resource is some 125 miles offshore, and people don't actually see it. Coupled with the fact that we have grown accustomed from childhood until we're now getting gray and without hair to be told about Guyana's potential and not ever realizing it. And so I think we've become quite cynical, quite unexpected about good news, and I believe don't even realize when something is about to be transformational in terms of its occurrence. So I believe it's a combination of factors, but I can speak on government's behalf that we certainly don't adopt or have chosen deliberately not to adopt a posture of being bombastic or of showing off, as we say in Guyana, about what we have.
Hilbert and Curtis, what's your view on that?
Chris, thanks for inviting us on the show and for reminding us that it's...
I hope you say that at the end of the program as well.
And thanks for reminding us that this is Extractive Industries Transparency Month. As a member of the MSG and a co-chair that represents industry, I'm happy to be here to talk about the MSG and the progress of Guyana on EITI to date. With respect to your question, I cannot offer an official position. I can only give
I'm asking you Guyanese.
I can only offer you
the minister was giving the government position.
So I can only offer you a personal position. Sure. My personal position was that I remarked to some colleagues today that of the three newspapers that I look at on a regular basis, one of them did not have it on the headline at all. One of them had it as a byline, and one of them has it as a headline. And I remarked that in the space of less than 2 years from the discovery or the announcement of the discovery, we have taken this for granted that we're an emergent oil nation, that we are not impressed by what is really quite exciting news. Guyana has an exciting future ahead of us. And while the minister and his team is preparing to manage that process as Guyanese, we should be excited about our future, and we should be excited about what is in store for Guyana. But maybe the lack of euphoria in the press reflected some of the situation that is in the country today. Unfortunately, we had a plane crash in the interior, and we also have the existing situation with the escaped prisoners. But that does not, in my opinion, mean that we're not excited about it. It's just that when it's closer at hand, we will probably get more excited as it becomes more real for us. That's just my view.
Curtis, you share that?
Thanks for the opportunity, Chris. I think reflecting on why there isn't euphoria, I think is probably a challenge for me. But I think what I'd like to add to the conversation on the resources and on EITI is that for us the focus really is not exclusively on the hydrocarbon finds. As it is right now, we are very dependent on natural resources in the country for our development, and we really focus on revenues from all of those resources, including all of the new very exciting finds. I agree we probably should be a lot more excited about. But this initiative, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, is one to really help us to begin to put attention on how we can utilize the full gamut of natural resources that we have available to us, that we've been depending on from the time we were aborted as a country to this day. I think in 2016, our reliance on extractives in terms of the contribution to the GDP was about 20%, which is very significant when you compare it to manufacturing and agriculture, which was about the same amount. We depend on extractives quite significantly, and we really ought to be focusing on all of our resources and being excited about the potential for all of those resources to transform the country.
Now, thanks. Now, what's the aim of this multi-stakeholder group?
Hilbert?
What's it supposed to be doing?
Okay, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative is a global framework that was set up in 2003 to create one of many mechanisms for monitoring what is happening in the extractive industries. Its intent, in its truest original form, was to have the companies declare what they pay to the government, and have the government also declare what they receive from the companies, and have an independent process to verify these two sides of the balance sheet. And once that information is made available and published from a source that can be deemed independent, that is when the greatest use of the initiative becomes available. It's because that information now, you don't question the source of the information, but citizens can engage in meaningful conversations as to the beneficial use of those resources and how they should be developed and what should happen to the revenue.
Which is a different issue altogether.
It's different.
One is the accounting, one is the application.
That's correct. But the key point is that if you have information available to the populace to where they can trust the source of the information through a framework and a process that operates to international standards and is seen to be transparent, and information in which they can place their confidence, that is the pillar on which you move to the next step, which is to have an informed conversation as to how best we can deploy the benefits from these resources, whether they should go to specific geographic regions or to specific industries within a larger developmental framework. So that is the greatest benefit, and I'm sure Curtis can embellish on that.
Yeah, I think for me, the multi-stakeholder group is a key feature in the initiative, as Hilbert explained. And the formulation really is shared power governance, if you can use that term. The three of us sitting here are the three co-chairs from the three sectors that make up the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. And government, industry, and civil society really operate on this grouping with equal decision-making power, equal rights to contribute to how this initiative is rolled out. And I think this really is a one of a kind, at least to this date.
Wow,
Our hope
yes.
from civil society is that this model would be taken on board in a lot more of the realms in which decisions need to be made that are to the benefit of the society. The EITI really started out of
Is it Norway?
well, it's headquartered in Norway, but it really started out of a need to help to address what's called the resource curse, in which it's been observed in many parts of the world where countries are endowed with lots of natural resources of great value, that those countries tend to exhibit less development than those that are not as endowed. And so it's an initiative really to have information, as my colleague said, to put objective information out there and to have informed discussion, which unfortunately, in my own opinion, is something that we lack sorely in Guyana today. And so we're hoping that through this initiative that we'll be able to address, at least begin to put information out there to address what really happens now. It's a lot of speculative discussions and so on, so that we can really be informed on what the resource flows are and how we can best use that to grow the kind of country that we would like.
Minister?
Well, just to add, in fact, I'm sitting here feeling quite happy that the initiative has been embraced in this way. So in 2013, the then government of Guyana declared its intention to move towards membership. And I believe there was some degree of dormancy between 2013 and 2015. Of course, the 10th Parliament and its attending negative features and so forth could have been the reasons. But certainly, after the discovery was made in May of 2015, and I took responsibility for the natural resources, I did have Cabinet issue a formal decision that this would be in November of 2015 that we would proceed to take up membership. Incidentally, at the end of November as well, Prime Minister Nagamoto and myself, we traveled to Mexico to attend the summit of the Open Governance Partnership. I think government wanted to look at both to see which one provided a better fit. The Open Governance Partnership is more of an initiative that came out of the Obama White House, and there were some questions about whether it would survive. And in fact, we have found that it has waned somewhat. And so we are quite happy to see, in fact, persons like Mr. Shields and Mr. Mike McCormack, who I will always sing the praises of, joining with government, and they were the ones who I would say drove the agenda. We were quite happy and quite willing to cooperate, and as Curtis said, we saw having 3 co-chairs sharing responsibilities, nothing to hide, bringing this on board as a sound model which we'd like to see exported into other arrangements that are governmental and non-governmental. So government is committed. We've sought to do this as fast as we can before production starts, because indeed it is predicated on the basis that the resources of a country belong to the people and not to individual governments or heads of state or even ministers of natural resources. And so this is an initiative that we are working to put in place before the first barrel of oil is put into a barrel, of course, and sold, so that we can have the discipline and we can have the systems in place. We're not at all naive into thinking that the dreaded resource curse will not move onto our shores, but at least we are working to ensure that we are insulated or inoculated to the extent that the effects or the impacts will be kept to a minimum. So it is with a sense of pride that I can share the platform tonight, figuratively and literally, with representatives of civil society and industry, and that together we can do this. And I know that government has come in for some flack, of course, for not being open enough and for not giving enough information out there. Just to say that I'm sure it may come up, that it is not born out of a desire.
I didn't share my notes with you, sir.
It is not out of a desire for us to hide anything. We are working towards getting things in place so that we can be as open as possible. And we can say that we are not in any way trying to hinder this process, and in fact have taken on quite a relaxed posture and allowed civil society and industry to drive it.
Interesting you mentioned a relaxed posture, and I think it was Curtis who mentioned about what's happening in the media. Do you sometimes get concerned about some of the headlines you see demonizing players and participants in the sector?
No,
You don't?
I ought to be. Many years ago, Mr. Desmond Hoyt called me to his office. He put me to sit down. He says, Raphael, you're going to hear some things and see some things said about you and things that you're involved in. You have to learn to be focused and get the job done. We are concerned, but I don't allow myself to become overly concerned because my intentions I know are good. I have good people.
No,
that
well,
I
I'm not
work
thinking
with.
of, I'm not thinking of the government at all. It's not the government that's being targeted, but
But
all
look,
operators, for
For
example.
example, you know, I was in Norway and I met Chris with the head of the Norway's Petroleum Directorate, inviting them to come to Ghana to extend their oil for development program to Ghana. And we had a long meeting, several hours. And at the end of it, the head of the department said, you should be very thankful that you have Exxon to deal with. I said, what? Why would you say that? He said, of all the companies in the world, their record is one of the best. That is not to say that they're perfect, but their record is one of the best in terms of health, safety, and so forth. So we're not being naive or we're not being complacent.
But isn't that why? I'm sorry, and this is not it's
Yes.
a little flow. If that is so, is it helpful that they should be demonized? And we saw someone said, I think, pedophilia or something like that. These oil companies.
I didn't see that. All
I mean, that can't. That
all
can't
companies
help
have a
us.
bad reputation wherever they go. At the end of the day, this resource has been presented to Guyana, all Guyanese. Do we say we are not going to develop it? Do we say to Exxon, we don't want you, let's go and look for another company? We have decisions to make, and imperatives are driving some of them. So I believe that Guyana's time is due, and we have to bring the resource to market.
Hilbert?
No, I mean, your point about our press being aggressive or overly aggressive,
It was not a bad thing, actually.
I think we need to look at it from the larger standpoint in that the press has a role to play as part of civil
I agree,
society
yes.
to question and to bring the decision makers to bear in terms of sharing information. So as a general principle, that makes sense. However, that said, as a person from industry, there needs to be responsible reporting. There needs to be an onus to inform yourselves. The truth is not inconvenient. Find the truth and then ask questions based on the truth, and then people will be more than happy to engage. Industry as a whole does not want to be demonized. I'm sure that Exxon, I don't speak for Exxon, would like to be seen as a good corporate citizen, and I'm sure they have a policy and an effort to be good corporate citizens. But if one is put on the defensive, then one would take defensive postures, and that is not good for the national conversation. So the transparency in EITI, again, its fundamental pillar is to, in an ideal world, have information be shared with the populace of Guyana, the stakeholders in this process, in such a way that they have confidence in the messenger. Too long in our development and in our history, we tend to shoot the messenger rather than listen to the message. I'm not going to go back to history and why that has occurred, but we need to change the game. We're faced with an exciting future. We need to embrace that future. We need to ask questions and to make sure that we don't make mistakes. The most popular of which is people talk about the Dutch disease and the resource course.
We'll come to that one just.
We don't want to go there, but at the same time, an informed populace, an informed citizenry can up the level of the conversation, and that may be reflected in the press once they're more comfortable with the information.
What's your view of the way we've been dealing with it?
I agree with the views expressed so far, and I think for me,
Two very conflicting almost views.
as a Guyanese, one of the things I would really like to see is that the power of the media really be wielded to engender the kinds of discourses that will end up with us growing, rather than us fighting to tear ourselves down, really scraps in the barrel, and really utilize that power to provide objective opinions and to encourage the populace to interact with that information and ask questions when questions ought to be asked, so that what we do is really build together rather than seeking to tear down. That's not to say that if there is something that is terrible to be reported, that the press should not report it. But I think it's really a power that exists within the media that should be utilized as much as possible for construction and growth really in society.
Let me say this, and before I say this, I say this. ExxonMobil is not a client of Raman McRae, it's not a client of Christopher Raman Associates. But the minister said when he was in Norway, the head of their petroleum sector was saying ExxonMobil has a good track record. When Professor George Guierres
Yes.
came to Guyana from Reading University at our invitation,
Yes.
he said the same thing. He said that they, of all the oil companies, in fact, do have well above average reputation. So that's good to hear. Now, this question of the Dutch disease, do we understand it? Have the media? No, that's something. Have they explored it? Have you seen any serious explanation for it? We talk about sovereign wealth fund, we saw all kinds of things, and not because if it's one thing we need to prevent, is the Dutch disease.
Yeah.
Now, you seem well prepared to deal with this, Curtis. I'll ask you to take the lead.
I can't say that, at least from my opinion, that there's been enough discourse around the potentials. Just to borrow a little bit from what Hilbert said just now, we're talking about an exciting future. I'd prefer to think that we actually have an exciting present. In that, as I mentioned before, we rely quite a lot on extracting resources already for our survival, and how we utilize the financial flows that come from that extraction, whether it be something that's renewable like fisheries or logs from the forest, or non-renewable like the gold that we've been extracting, or bauxite that we've been extracting for 100 years.
Or oil which we will soon be
oil which we hope to be extracting.
We will be.
Yeah, we will be extracting in a matter of 2 years. For me, the discourse, part of the discourse that's really important to have is how we utilize the finances that flow from that extraction, as I said, to build the kind of society that we want. And how do we use that drawdown on the natural resources to really build the kinds of human capacity and the kind of infrastructure that we need to really operate an economy that is outside of extraction, a sustainable economy, or a non-extractive economy, rather. So one of the concerns that I have personally is ensuring that the resources that flow from that extraction really helps us to build the kind of economy that does not have to rely on the extraction. So it's not to say that we wouldn't continue to have extraction, but we should not be so reliant on it that when the prices on the global market flows, as many of the countries, our neighboring countries are good examples of how that impact.
Both Trinidad and Venezuela.
And Suriname as well,
Yes,
to an
indeed.
extent. I think Venezuela is probably the best example of where not.
Trinidad is hurting as well.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
badly,
Yes.
I think they're all three of them are very good examples of where we should be aiming not to end up by tapping into even more resources, even more financial flows from the natural resources that we've been endowed with. And I think that's a conversation that we really need to engender within the media and really begin to discuss ways as to how, with the flows we have already, we can begin to prepare ourselves to avoid having to go down that path.
Hilbert, your understanding of the Dutch disease?
I mean, my fundamental understanding of it revolves around the fact that you don't want to rely on one industry for your inflows
And you
financially,
neglect
and neglect
other,
the development of other industries, and so you face the vagaries of being a price taker in what happens globally. Where I want to come at this from is that the extractive industries have been in Guyana for over 100 years, starting with our bauxite industry in 1917. And we have quite a significant gold industry as well. And as my colleagues from the Miners Association would want me to make sure I stay,
Make your plug.
is that we should not, when we look at development, forsake the existing industries, the six pillars, the six sisters, as the president refers to, of our existing industries. We do have an industry, and we have survived as a country without oil up till this point in time. So with the advent of oil, we should holistically embrace all of our industries and strive to protect the industries that we do have, and make them better industries so they can contribute. So from that standpoint, extractives are going to be a key. Guyana has phenomenal geological endowment, and it behooves us to develop those resources to the betterment of the society. We should not go try and do something that we're not very good at, where we don't have a natural niche or we don't have a leg up in order to do that. Whereas with our geological endowment, we have the ability to do that. So we need to continue to develop the extractive industries, to use it as a driver of development in the interior of the country, to use it as an imperative for territorial occupation so we can stamp our claim to the society. So there's so many other things that you can use the extractives. When I chaired the National Development Strategy chapter for mining, one of the key questions that I asked the government of the day, what is the role of the mining industry? Is it to garner revenue for the coffers of the state, or is it to drive development? We have a unique opportunity coming up in front of us that when we're not so dependent on the traditional extractive industries, but we will have a broader revenue stream, maybe we can now widen the imperative. And in the case of projects, say for instance, the two existing gold mines, they're fly-in, fly-out operations. But if we use them as nucleus for development and create settlements around them, then we can drive infrastructure that will survive beyond the exploitation of these finite resources. So this is a larger thinking that we can start to embrace.
Let me ask you about rice and sugar in terms of the resource curse and flows from one, say, the extractive sector. How do you deal with that?
I mean, I'm not an expert on rice and I'm not an expert on sugar, so my comments again will be personal. Guyana has had a number of contributors to its total basket of revenues through the periods of time. And all of these industries, they're primary industries, they're price taker industries. So the sovereign wealth fund that we talk about is a way of balancing or harboring this to be able to even out the spending rate, is something as a principle that has to be embraced. There are people that will make the argument that at one time sugar was one of the key pillars for this society, and now that sugar is in trouble, just like bauxite was in trouble a little while ago, we should cushion those industries because they're not just industries in the case of rice, sugar, and bauxite. They are major employers, they are major contributors to the social well-being of the country. So maybe we need to take a longer term look. But realistically, there could be an argument, do we want to plug 2% of the GDP of the country into an industry that seems to have negative fundamentals, or should we channel it into better jobs or better industries as the government is espousing?
Minister,
I'm not an expert on that.
Because we want to stick to this.
course.
The question was really, but because of Hilbert raised a particular point. On this question of the Dutch disease, what's your take on it?
Well, I
it?
share Curtis's view that we don't know enough, and I think we have to admit that, whether we are in industry, civil society, or government. And this is one area in which indeed the media could help us, all of us, to become better acquainted, better appreciative of the scourge known as the resource curse. And how do we prevent it? I think it's like someone telling you that you will get a headache in 2 years' time. And you think you can prepare for that headache, but until that migraine comes, you really don't know. You may stock up on prophylactics, you may eat better, you may exercise, you may think that you are going to be in good health. But until the pain comes, only then can you make adjustments. But with that said, I can tell you that within the last 21 days, we've had teams advising the Ministry of Finance from the IDB, the World Bank, and the IMF, and all of them are looking to see how, individually, but now they've gone back to work to come up with a plan to help us to stave off Dutch disease. But in saying so, I have to be the first to acknowledge that it can't be done at the governmental level alone. We've got to, when they come back with their plan, we've got to now invite industry, we've got to invite civil society, we've got to invite the media. And how can we ensure, because each country, of course, has its own peculiarities. And, as I've said recently to the IMF team and to all of them, we are West Indian people, very cavalier, swashbuckling, the way we play cricket, the way we live, as against the Nordic way. Nordic people they delay enjoyment. I mean, when I was in Finland once, the people don't seem to want to even
So
smile.
this Dutch disease is partly a cultural issue as well.
It could be.
Because
So-
you have countries, Canada,
Yeah.
Norway, and those countries.
Yeah.
They've got the resources, and they don't seem to be suffering.
Exactly, but we like to party, we like to spend big, we like to show off. It's who we are. So we may say that we are going to insulate ourselves, but I do believe that until the headache comes, there's only so much we can do, but we'll have to be in a position to make adjustments when the headache comes. And to have something that is uniquely Guyanese.
But you're not saying, Minister, that we shouldn't start from now.
Of course, no, that's what we're saying. We have started, and the teams are here, but when they come with their reports, I'm going to urge that we invite civil society and industry, the media and other well-wishers and persons who have an interest to help us to fashion something that
Well, can I take
good
it,
for us.
however, and this question is directed to Hilbert Shields and Curtis Bernard, can I take it that you ensure that you're part of those discussions? Because you don't represent yourself.
No.
Exactly.
You represent the sectors, and that you make sure that you participate in those discussions.
Yeah, and I think, as I said before, the opportunity of EITI and the way that we have started to operate in this tripartite band is very important for us to take on that mantle and to really challenge government, and from civil society's standpoint, challenge both government and industry to do as much as can be done to stave this off. But there are two things that were mentioned just now that really helped me to think about ways in which we can actually help to understand what we mean when we talk about the Dutch disease. And I go back to one of the persons that I think the best explanation I've heard is from Professor Roger Hussein, I think his name is, from Trinidad.
Yes.
Where he describes it as the West Indies cricket team in the glory days of having Brian Lara, who can score 501 runs all by himself.
And
So
didn't care about the rest of the team.
Exactly. So we focus on one big player and not recognize that there are other talents. He has a real hang up on Sarwan, for example, and that because there was a Lara in the team, the talent of Sarwan was not focused on. So in terms of having a balanced team, that wasn't there. It's the same with the resources. If we focus on simply developing one without recognizing the potentials and utilizing that very strong one to help to grow the other sectors, then we can be in trouble.
Well,
and the second point,
sorry, go on.
yeah, the second point is about food production. One of my personal things is that we really know that we are in a state of one of the symptoms that we can get, that the headache that Minister is speaking about is really coming on when we get to the point where we're not producing our own food. And that's why I think we, with resources from the extractive sector, possibly with other resources as well, we really need to be shoring up not only rice and sugar, really looking at it from a business standpoint, but shoring up agriculture and our food production capabilities on the whole. If we like the example, I think Venezuela is a very good one, where if you don't have an agricultural sector, then you really
not too far
challenge.
behind.
Indeed. But I think, and Hilbert made a point, that these industries don't necessarily need shoring up. They've been productive, they've been in themselves. What they need is good management. And it's the same. But I want to make this point, and I'm pointing at you, Hilbert, and pointing at you, Curtis, that this tripartite arrangement, you have to carry out the task to make sure that this Dutch disease resource curse do not take place. Let's turn to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which I think Minister raised. What is your take on it? Now we know Norway, 97% of the revenue goes towards the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Norway, when it discovered petroleum, didn't have the social and physical deficit that we have suffered from decades. I don't think any Guyanese would accept that we should put aside 97% of our revenue for a future generation and allow our decrepit state of physical and human capital to continue. What's your view? What kind of percentage we talking about?
I mean, Chris, you've stated what every Guyanese would feel as a reaction to this. We know the state of our infrastructure. We were reminded of it daily when we turn on the TV right now with the situation with the prisons and the fact that we need to build infrastructure. But let's go back to Norway and the history of the Norwegian oil development. when oil was discovered in Norway, the Norwegian government actually took money from infrastructure projects because they started from a higher infrastructure
That's
base
correct, yes.
and diverted that money into direct capital investment into wells. Say they would have
Which
invested,
they owned, of course, which is not the same with us.
but they also invested, participated in the investment and shared the
Yes.
risk. And so essentially they were developing equity positions. So now the revenues that come, not just come by way of bilateral agreements, but they also come by way of the equity investments that were made
But
by
they
the
own,
Norwegian.
they own their oil.
That's right. And so coming back to that, I mean, we all know that we need to develop the infrastructure in Guyana. The challenge for whoever the government of the day is to balance those resources to
Challenge
where
for the MSG of which we're part.
to we'll come back to that. To balance the use of those resources and the deployment of those resources where they take care of today's issues and still provide for the future issues. And that balance, that judicious balance, is going to call for very wise men and women making very good decisions.
Yeah, I think balance is probably the key word here, because what I'd like to put on the table is something probably
Go ahead.
A bit on the other side. Minnesota mentioned earlier that the resources really are owned by the people, all of the people of this country, and I would argue the people now and the people in the future for the country. When we look at the 2012 census figures, half of our population is below the age of 25. 70% is below the age of 40. And if we look at it in the longer term, the resources that we monetize now, we're actually not allowing the future generations the option of exploiting those resources. So it's imperative upon us to ensure that the conversion of this natural resource to financial resource benefits those future generations as well. In terms of our percentage, in terms of what you put away and invest for the future versus what we use for the very immediate needs that we have now is a conversation I think that really needs to continue. But I think it's imperative that we must put away enough to ensure that it's properly invested and that it benefits those generations 100, 200 years from now, I would argue.
Minister, your take?
Well, I agree with Curtis's formulation, and I think it's all about balance. It's all about meeting current needs. And many people say, look what Norway is doing. And indeed, you're right. Norway had a very developed pension scheme and developed infrastructure and social systems in place. And there's quite a body of literature that is saying now, like, developing countries in this hemisphere, in Africa, etc., you just can't afford to put aside 97% of your revenue towards savings. And so we expect that we will have a fund that allows us to do both. We are blessed, even though it is sometimes a curse, in having a small population, because we don't derive the economies that we need sometimes. But we are less than 1 million, and of course a lot are going to come home, but we don't need a lot of money to bring Guyana up to a certain level. We need just about 2 or 3 roads, one main port, to be free from fossil fuels in terms of our energy generation, and bringing our healthcare and education systems up to a certain standard. So it will not require billions upon billions to get it done, but I do expect it will require some billions, but not in the amounts of
because
a
I'm
Norway.
not sure. No, because the population and all that is very different.
And so at some point in time, I believe we can plateau and then go into savings. But with the revenue that's coming and the last known reserves are pegged at between 2.5 to 2.7 billion barrels of oil. Yeah. Using a multiplier of say $50 per barrel, and we being entitled after cost recovery to 50% of that. We are going to be well endowed, and Curtis puts it right. We have to take care of this and future generations and think sensibly.
I don't think there's any doubt. Now, I want to get to a couple of quick questions on this initiative. Are we being optimistic about the value of this initiative when we take the conclusion of a recent study which states, and I quote, "At this stage, evidence for the broader impacts of public governance-oriented MSIs is weak or non-existent." That we're overplaying and overblowing this business of the MSGs and the EITI kind of thing.
I have one answer to that. What is the alternative? There's none. And I think that given our history as a people, given our levels of our development, our strives and disagreements since independence, here we have a model that is tripartite, that is shared, of us getting together. And I, whilst it may not be the best, it is like democracy, except for all others, the worst form. I don't see an alternative to this, and I believe that it behoves us to pursue this path, and we accept, in my view, that this offers us, at this point in time, the best chance as a people to come together to manage the resource for the benefit of current, present, and future generations.
Well, do we need EITI to bring people together for that discussion? I mean, you've got developed countries that don't have EITIs.
Yeah.
That's the reality as
There are
well.
more undeveloped or underdeveloped countries that subscribe to EITI than there are developed countries.
That's the
So
point I
maybe
make.
maybe that speaks to the fact that this is a framework that helps as you advance governance and as you develop your country. I mean, as Minister said, what is the choice? The EITI's record internationally, it doesn't have a great pass mark, but it has made a difference in a number of jurisdictions.
Like?
In the number of different countries.
Well,
like
I was asking you, like-
Philippines has done well from it, and they have.
That's not such a good example.
But
Philippines
they
is the
have
last
done
example
well.
I would give at this point.
But from the resource
You have a
development.
criminal leading that country.
But let's focus on what EITI is, not what it's not. EITI doesn't deal with the political process. It is if with your
Sorry,
accounting
Hilbert.
with your accounting background, it is in the strictest sense a reconciliation of a balance sheet, and then using the information to then aid good governance. Now, whether you choose to use the information or not for good governance is where civil society has the key role in this tripartite arrangement.
Nigeria, we just recovered about 4-point-something billion
Yeah, and
dollars
they
in Nigeria.
and they still identified more than they were able to recover.
My view, I mean, this is my personal view, and I don't know if you share it, but I think good governance, good audit, good controls should not, you didn't need to recover, you should have collected that money when it was due. That's my position. Nigeria just got unduly corrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that as the ideal situation, that's where we should be heading and where probably we should be as a country. But I think considering where we are now, pursuing an initiative like EITI, I think is extremely important to put us on the road to getting to that ideal situation where you don't need to label something because it simply becomes the norm of operation. And that's really my perspective on it.
You see, my view is that given our constitution, the Article 13, Article 1, which is a very, very important, democratic and the participation. Article 149C, which says you have a duty, a right to participate in decision making. Article 146, I believe, 146, yes, that the flow of information, you have a right to those things. You don't need EITI to get that, but that it helps is something. But does our constitution and our framework of governance not already allow those things?
It does, but at the same time, it does not. Because we may have them, we may have prescribed them since 2001. I was a part of that process. Yet in 2017, those prescriptions have not borne fruit. And so here we are again, continuing to try this group. And like I said, well, to borrow Curtis's enthusiasm about the construct, I quite like the idea that we have co-chairs, that we can see eye to eye, that we can get things done, and it is a model of inclusive
But that's
governance.
Article 13.
Yes, but
inclusionary democracy.
But nowhere else is it being practiced.
No, but we should practice it.
This is what
We
we're
should
doing now.
practice it.
This is what we're doing
Well,
now.
let me. But Hilbert, I wanted you to answer that question.
Yes, go ahead.
I suspect you were going to walk me in that direction. Chris, what we have as governing frameworks, there's a lot of people that will tell you if the structures that we have in place were followed, the systems that we have in place, maybe we would not be having this discussion. But these institutions, these structures need to be reinforced and be supplemented by other mechanisms. In an ideal world, we want a constitution that works and that includes all the people, but we don't live in an ideal world.
No, in a practical
We
world,
live
you
in
want
a
the constitution to work. You don't need an ideal world to get the constitution to work.
But in the world in which we live today, the fact that you have another mechanism to augment and supplement the process, and where you have have a government that is committed and a citizenry and an industry that is committed, I think it's an initiative that should be encouraged. It's not a substitute, it's not a panacea, it doesn't replace the existing institutions of governance that are in place. But it's just one more wheel in which you can build. And we need to understand and keep that. We need to understand what EITI isn't, in as much as we need to understand what it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Curtis, you want to?
Yeah, I fully endorse that. And really, to me, it's a building block to get, as I said before, a building block to get to where we really ought to be and where, from civil society standpoint, that we would really like to get to.
Look, part of my role here is to provoke discussion.
Yes, of course.
And you're doing that well.
But if that be the case, why aren't we legislating? And shouldn't we legislate then the MSG and the EITI? Why do we make it voluntary? You have a constitution, you have legislation, and you're saying those things don't work. Why would a voluntary, non-binding arrangement be a better option?
We haven't made that decision. We've made a decision to form a MSG, and in fact, even today we held a meeting, and it's ongoing. We are moving towards submitting our application in August, and you'll be pleased to know that the next conference is going to be held in the Philippines. In Manila.
I don't think I'd be allowed here.
But no, please don't go. But I think as we mature, we'll make some decisions. Do we? And it came up today. Do we move towards making it a corporate entity?
Yes, a corporate entity.
Do we make it into a statutory corporation?
Yes.
So that discussion is ongoing, and we have not closed it out to say that it is only voluntary.
But isn't it is it far preferable to a voluntary situation? When you have a constitution that we all admit is not quite working, we have legislation that's not quite working. Shouldn't we at least make this some mandatory thing if we think that this is going to fill those gaps?
I think it's a bridge that we will have to cross maybe sometime very soon. And as Minister said, there isn't a determination that we will not or should not go in that direction. But I would go back to the point that for me this really is should be seen as a building block to get to where we want. Which is to where we want what? Good governance, basically, and the kind.
Stewardship of the resource.
Money. APNU AFC was all about good governance.
That's why we
not about EITI.
That's why we're moving in this direction.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. That is why we cabinet.
Chris, there are jurisdictions that have started with purely voluntary, and as they evolve and as they grow, have embarked on a journey to entrench it into the legal structure. But if you've got something that is working, EITI has started out with a tremendous amount of goodwill from the citizenry. This is something we've just had 5 engagements reaching out to civil society, and we're going to expand that process, and we're getting feedback on a regular basis as to what people want to see, and as we educate them, we are getting a feel for what they also expect out of the process, and as the conversation matures, it will go in a direction that we want to keep this an effective organization. I don't think any one of us sitting here want to be part of another just set of meetings and a rubber stamp that doesn't achieve anything real. I'm certainly too old for that, and you and I are probably in the same boat.
I think I'm a little older than you, but let's go on.
I thought you were told to speak for himself.
No, I'm willing to admit my age.
Okay. I think the other point as well is that having yet another bit of legislation would not necessarily guarantee the results as well.
Well, if you legislate, you become a corporate body, for one thing, as the minister was suggesting, and a corporate body is in fact subject to various forms of legal action. You mentioned earlier, and I used the word power, and I was wondering, where does the power? How does the word power fit in the framework of an EITI?
More moral suasion.
Because I thought
for now at least.
Yeah, part of the power of this initiative really is in the image and the perception as to how you operate as a country, or for companies that are involved in it, it's how you operate as a company. I think that kind of social capital really is where the power of EITI as it is currently constructed is.
The public has heard lots of lovely sounding acronyms. TG is one of them with which I was have been associated, Transparency Institute. What's the difference here? TG is a civil society organization. I'm sure the government recognizes it and accords it the kind of respect it deserves. Where's the difference?
I think the biggest difference here, and this is not to say that other initiatives are not do not have the potential to drive the kinds of results that EITI can. But for me, the answer is very simple. This is really an initiative where it's three parties sitting together, looking to head towards a common destination, rather than either just two parties or one of the parties trying to encourage the others to go in a particular direction. This is industry, government, and civil society looking to be able to chart where we go together. And I think that's a very strong
So the active participation in this by the government is what is the difference.
Yeah,
here.
By all parties.
But also to supplement, if you look at the structure and the output, one of the big challenges with a lot of organizations is the questioning of the messenger that I referenced earlier. If we have a process where information is voluntarily provided by the companies that sign up to this process, and then the government provides that information to an independent auditor that looks at that data and is able to reconcile that data and put out a report in a form that society can understand and relate to. Chris, look at the power of informed discussions that will come out of that process. We move the level of the national conversation from one of them say and hearsay and anecdotal to facts-based discussion, which allows us to now engage in a conversation as to what is the best use, how much money should be in the sovereign wealth fund, how much should go back into...
Is this part of the function of the MSG to decide?
This is one of the outcomes.
Is it going to be, wouldn't that be encroaching on the jurisdiction of the government and the
But it's
Minister of
one of the
Finance?
fundamental
but the government is
products.
also a member of
No, but the Minister of Finance, is he going to say, look, I am going to be guided by what MSG or EITI
No,
tell me?
what would happen is the document would be available for civil society to have an informed discussion. So
Which
if, for
document?
instance,
Which document?
the EITI report, the
So annual report.
the annual output report, because the credibility of that document should not be challenged because of the process that leads to disclosure of the information and the,
Credibility can always be challenged.
and the
Don't worry.
validation of the information that is there by independent folks. That is what is important. Once you then take that document and start to use it, that is the greatest strength of EITI, in that now we're not questioning the source of the information, but we're looking to how this information can guide our thought process and what we should say to our politicians. Or when they come into our constituent democracy and come into our constituency and say, elect me back because this is what I will do with your money.
I want to raise, the Minister invited me to raise this question of disclosure of information. You know, that has become rather topical. Is disclosure of these contracts, which, because they form the basis out of which information will flow.
Yes.
These agreements are made on behalf of the
On the people.
people. They're made by the state, not by a government. Don't the people have a right? And what would be the justification
Yes.
for depriving the people of that right?
Of course, we start with the basic premise that that is a right. It is
Yeah.
almost an inalienable right. But as you quoted various articles of the Constitution, so each one at the end of it has a proviso.
Yes.
That says that this right may be circumscribed in the.
This is not one of those, right? This is
but
not one
most
of
rights
those.
are. What I can say is that in the first instance, I have no doubt that the MSG will have access to these documents. We will be signing confidentiality agreements, etc. Secondly, I keep stressing, and I don't think maybe not well enough, that at this point in time, we are in a very delicate year headed towards, it looks like, the ICJ. And we have, even though some of us are lawyers, we have received the benefit of advice from our foreign experts and advisors who are preparing us for the possibility of a matter, a juridical settlement of a matter. And there has been, and I can only say this much, a very active effort by some others to gain access to our documents. and we have every reason to even say publicly that some people have been put up to try to get documents on behalf of some other states. And so, based on that advice, and based on a very curious clause which is in the Constitution, which I know is, even in my view, somewhat ambiguous, in the Petroleum Act rather, about disclosures, we have been advised that at this particular point in time, that is not to say that it will always be this way, that we need to be cautious. Let this year pass out. Let us see where we are headed vis-a-vis the settlement of the border controversy, and then we will take it from there. Right now, the Petroleum Act is under scrutiny by the Commonwealth Secretariat. I've asked that they take a look as well at the very Section 4 to see how it could be either removed altogether or modified, because it does strangely put everything in the hands of the licensee, that the licensee shall give permission to the government to publish.
That's only in relation to information provided by the licensee,
but
not
when-
about the contract.
Yeah, but when the contract becomes, and for example, the contract has a confidentiality clause in it,
Yes.
and they've mentioned in 4.3 about if the agreement has a confidentiality clause. So this is a section that was put in place by the previous government, and while I wouldn't here sit and bemoan it to say there must have been some mischief that former President Jack Dew was seeking to cure because he was then the president, but I've asked
He
the
wasn't,
Commonwealth-
you know.
he was.
It was Janet Jagan
No,
who signed those agreements.
Yes, but Section 4 was put in place by in 1997,
It was an amendment.
an amendment. The confidentiality clause came in 1997. And so the Commonwealth Secretariat is looking at it for us. We recognize the right. We'd like to be able to meet it, and we are working to see how best we can bring this information to the public.
Your thoughts on this matter, Jack? We have 2 minutes left.
The standards, the last EITI standards of 2016 has broadened the scope of EITI in terms of the information that's reporting, going away from the strict accounting balance sheet, and speaks to issues of beneficial ownership and disclosure of terms of contracts and so on. So the EITI process does look to be able to do that. But as a practitioner in industry and as 2 lawyers sitting on my right, you will understand that contracts have clause within the contracts, and sanctity of contract and stability of agreements have to be respected as a larger principle. I'm not using that to advocate for or defend any position, but
I
as a
noticed.
principle, it should be respected. So that's
Goodness.
Yeah, and you would appreciate that the unique position I sit from a civil society says that we want to see the contract and we want to see every other contract, but we fully, at least I personally understand the legal, at least appreciate, I don't understand it fully, appreciate the legal ramifications of that. But as Hilbert said, the process of EITI is one that really looks at how we improve governance as well. So we have to report on how we are moving towards having full disclosure of contracts that are made on the behalf of the citizenry for the exploitation of natural resources, as well as who benefits, not the companies only, but the beneficial owners of those companies that are involved in the extractive industry.
Minister Raphael Trotman.
All I would like to say is it has been a pleasure being here and having this discussion tonight, and I hope you can have a part 2, or we can have discussions like these in the future.
Gentlemen, you're always invited. In fact, I
Thanks
have
for the opportunity.
I should say that it's over the past couple of weeks I discussed with a number of persons discontinuing this program.
No.
It's tough to get people to come on this program. So really,
I
I'm
enjoyed
deeply
being here.
appreciative
Thank you.
for this kind of discussion. I'm sure our viewers would have enjoyed this past hour. At least I hope so, viewers. And so on your behalf, I thank Minister Trotman, Mr. Hilbert Shields, and Mr. Curtis Bernard, co-chairpersons of the MSG, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Yes.
Operators and viewers, thank you, good night, and see you next week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Very good program.